how important it is to be vulnerable. What do you think? Why do you believe so? And not only as an artist, but also someone who curates other artists. You worked with Bisa Butler, you also had the portrait show recently, you've shown some amazing artists.
I think that part of it is knowing that there's no such thing as perfect when it comes to putting together a show, and that when you're working with an artist, it's really important to trust them and their vision.
And I think artists have such an important, and the work that you're doing has such an important role in that because I can say, I would love, let's say, what's happening, or Crafts of Nairobi.
Yeah, art is really incredible like that, right? It's, like I said about the spirituals, I think it has such a power to capture a moment and also recuperate history.
Welcome to the podcast, Liz.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Very excited to have you. We've already spoken about, why I'm very excited to have you, but also, how about we start with you introducing yourself and then we'll start a conversation. What do you say?
Great. My name is Liz Andrews. I am here today in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live, and I am the director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, which is the only museum in the nation in the United States dedicated to art by and about Black women. I'm I'm an artist myself, a singer, I'm a mother, I'm a student of life, and I love things that really center women's voices as artists.
I love that. And I think that's where and why I'm so excited to speak to you. Because I think both of us have very common ground on being a creative, but also having a heart for women. And also our experiences, I feel like, our experiences as women in different parts of the world. You are hyper focused and you support and invest in the work of African artists, African women artists. And I want to talk about that. What brought you in that direction? And I also know that you are yourself an artist from being that part to now being a music director. And in, following your heart in this direction of even advocating for the community and investing back in your own community. How has that happened?
Sure. So, as an artist, I started out singing. I have been singing my whole life and I was really inspired by especially the spirituals or the Negro spirituals here in the United States. It's So the spirituals are is the music created and sung by enslaved Africans in this country. And spirituals, yeah, they're songs.
Oh, these are spirituals. These are like the songs that are. Oh, wow.
hmm So these are songs that people sung while they were working, songs that people sung that sometimes had encoded messages. For example, if there was a revolt or something, a chance to escape, then hidden messages could be in these. Yes, but even more than that, these songs, I think, kept people alive at a time of incredible dehumanization and oppression. So I remember singing these songs and thinking that there is more history imbued in these songs than I could ever find in any textbook. The songs itself carry the pain and the history. So I came to the arts originally as an artist, and it's a long, winding.
As also someone who sings, like not as a visual artist, but as a vocal artist. But now you practice in the visuals.
Yes. So I think that because I'm an artist who uses my voice, who uses my body and performance, I think that's why I love visual art so much, because it's the kind of art that I don't do. And so,
But like we're all artists at the heart, but we all have mediums that we are first comfortable. Like I'm someone, I love visual. It's my first medium, but I also love to like I've been learning a lot of classical dance, and I love dance and music. But it's not something I can express myself in. But it's also something I enjoy. Like I dearly enjoy.
yeah. And I think that it is important to realize your gifts on many levels and know that different chapters in life will bring you different opportunities to express yourself and to help others express themselves. So at this moment at the Spelman Museum, I really amplify the voices and the artworks of, and it's actually women of the African diaspora. So from the continent, a lot of African American, Caribbean women. And so it's, yeah, and it's a very different set of skills to make sure other artists have their voices heard than it is to invest in your art of your coming to the arts administration side, running a museum, working in museums, really is very related. And I think I'm passionate about it because I am an artist.
And you also understand that it's not like no matter what field of art we're in, I think the experience how hard it is to break into a creative field, to understand, to I think we all everyone who's gone through this journey of being an artist understands, how you find creativity, but then turn it into a profession, then turn it into something, and then it's just the amount of experiences it takes and learnings it brings. I'm sure you resonate with that.
Yes. And this is making me think about how I think I've been neglecting myself as an artist a lot as of late because I've focused on, making sure that, yeah, yeah. And so I'm glad to have this conversation because it's a good reminder that I'm an artist first.
Yes, you're an artist. I love this because a lot of times, like, like even I have this journey where I have always been an artist first, but I'm more than one person. I feel like if I'm something, like if I'm passionate about what I do and I want to multiply that, if I love the arts, I love supporting the arts, I love speaking to artists, people who are involved in the arts. So that's more than just uh, as one role of as an artist, but sometimes when we bring too many things on the plate, there's also something that you let go and let it come back, and it's like a constant strife in between these roles.
Yeah, it really is. And I think especially as women, because we, I think, are expected to and are used to balancing everything. You're supposed to be able to kind of do it all and do it with grace. And, it's really important to invest in yourself.
You also talk about vulnerability as an artist. I remember reading somewhere how important it is to be vulnerable. Um, what do you think? Why do you believe so? And not only as an artist, but also someone who curates other artists. You worked with Bisa Butler. You also had the portrait show recently. You've shown some amazing artists. What is that you look in an artist while showing specifically because museum shows are um, a very pivotal moment for a lot of artists' career.
I think that part of it is knowing that there's no such thing as perfect when it comes to putting together a show, and that when you're working with an artist, it's really important to trust them and their vision, and also know that you bring something else entirely to the vision as a curator. For example, we did an exhibition at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art in the fall of last year, 2023. I curated that show, and it was Harmonia Rosales' master narrative. And she's an incredible painter who paints the Orisha. the African deities, the African god. Her name is Harmonia, Harmonia Rosales, and she's Afro-Cuban and draws her inspiration from the patakis, these fables, stories, myths of the African gods, which, by the way, at least here in the United States, we learn all about the Greek gods and the mythology. These stories and these gods, in some ways, are older, and a lot of times the Greek Roman mythologies are based on those African tales. So I loved the idea of recuperating these stories. However, thinking about vulnerability that you were asking about, Spelman College was founded as a Christian school. It's no longer the tagline, but at one point it was Spelman College, our whole school for Christ. And so it took a fair amount of a mixture of vulnerability and courage to say, I'm going to do this exhibition where this is something that is not based in Christianity. This is an African religion. And in addition to that, a lot of the times when you see images of these gods in the Caribbean, especially, they're very fair skinned, like myself, and kind of, anglicized. Colorism is a worldwide thing. So these are, people who look like they're from Nigeria, which is where these gods and these stories come from. So it it took an amount of vulnerability to say, we're going to do an exhibition that centers these gods and this beautiful art. And there was a whole section that I really revolved around Yemaya, who is the she's kind of the mother of all of the gods. She's represented as the ocean, the salt water. So the entire east wing, which is the side that faces the Atlantic Ocean, was inspired in my mind by Yemaya and the ocean. And that's, I think, a big deal for a school that has been historically very, but we had a beautiful response to it. And I think that even our wisdom scholars who are studying religion and Christianity, especially, came, and I think it was a really enriching experience, both because the art itself is beautiful. There was an overturned one part of it. She created her version of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, but it was pictures on the hull of an overturned slave ship, knowing that these gods traveled with us across the ocean in the slave trade. So I think it was a way into these stories through beautiful art. And for a lot of people, the first time they had heard about these this mythology, this religion.
Wonderful. I think I really like her work right now. I've seen it for the first time, but also because I've been off late very interested in Indian mythology, and I think this is something that feels very. I'm born in India. I have lived in India, but also we've been so much westernized. It does not matter a lot of time how where we come from. That in spite of being in India. Um, I have grown up in a generation where our culture has swayed a little bit away from who we were originally. We've been too much westernized, and we're also a colonized country. Like, the British came here and they did capitalize a lot of on our culture, but also we took so many parts of them that it's the whole authentic self of who our culture was has evolved and you know it's only 76 years of independence, so we can imagine. I'm 32 years old, so I'm this next generation. My parents, were the first generation post independence. Like my grandfather was the first who came here after independence and in India. and then my parents were born, and then we were the first generation in the internet and like who were exposed to Western culture. So I saw that shift, that we were not really exposed to a lot of things. And now as a grown adult, when I started, specifically I think when I lost my mom, I think that is when I started to feel a loss of identity of who I was, where I came from, and what is it like, who really my roots are. And that's when I started getting into mythology a lot. And I love how these stories of our own cultures that tell us, I think there's something that we can place ourselves in. It's something that um rem- it, it just reminds me, it these are stories like, we've all grown up with, um we've grown up in a time where we saw or we heard a lot of books and stories that were from the West, but they are not as popular. Let's say our holy book, which is called the Bhagavad Gita, it's now very popular via the internet across the world. But while I was growing up, today, if like, I have a nephew and a niece, and like, I have this ritual where every night in the morning I would read a chapter from the book, or I would get up in the morning and I'll read, like, I'll have this folklore, like you said, a folklore song, or a bhajan, what we call in Hindi. And it's such a good reminder, and art has become a very big tool for me. Like, I take a lot of inspiration from these Greek mythologies and Indian mythologies, finding myself, finding my own identity. And I feel like it's such a great way to, I think, in a way, restore our lost history that somewhere in the West, in such a globalized world and so much westernized world, we're consistently losing. I can only imagine how different it is for African culture and people, who've, whose, whose identity has been completely ripped off.
That is so interesting because I feel like, colonialism is so powerful and it looks different in different places, but has really, like what you were saying about the Bhagavad Gita being kind of popularized now almost back to you because the West is like, oh, this is interesting. This kind of goes along with other neo spirituality practices.
Also like something like, there's this constant movement. Like, I am a yoga practitioner as well. And I'm a traditional yoga practitioner, how we are taught and done in India. And I constantly hear this, like, how white labeled has yoga become, how yoga is an ancestral, also a very rooted form of India. And it's even not called yoga, would you believe? It's called yoga in Hindi. And it's called, like, Hatha Yoga, or the different Ashtanga yoga, whatever. But how the moment it started to become globalized and more westernized, how it's been like, it's like how history is also changing in its own tone, and how important it is for us today to sometimes, you know, claim our identities. Otherwise, the dilution is so strong that sometimes we won't be able to claim of, like, how, let's say, the yoga is done in the West is very different from what actual yoga means here. It's like it's two different worlds and two different spirits.
And if I'm not mistaken, what we think of as yoga in the West is like the movement, and we think of it kind of as an exercise, like Pilates. But that is supposed to prepare you for meditation and prayer, right?
So yoga in India, let's just start from a very basic difference. Like, I was just reading this thesis on how in the West right now there are so many brands that are selling yoga wear, and honestly, in India, like, and these are yoga wear, these tight leggings that you wear to the gym, or no, that's not yoga in India. In fact, if you know India, traditionally we're a very conservative country, in the sense of, specifically, we dress very modestly, and yoga is a very Vedic, and very, it's a very strong and traditional form of meditation, and it's also spiritual. It's not a physical form, it's a spiritual form, where it's a very simple as Surya Namaskar. Surya Namaskar is very popular across the world. Well, people look at it as fitness. It's actually praying to this god of sun. So it's weird. basically there's a Surya Namaskar and there's a Chandra Namaskar, which means you do Surya Namaskar in the morning, and it's basically Surya means sun, and Namaskar means greeting. So it's greeting to the sun. And it popularized as something, as a form of course yoga, as a way for to keep healthy body. But the first is, healthy mind, connection to God. It means perseverance. And even if there is no yoga wear, in fact, for yoga you'll see people wearing the loosest clothes. And Hinduism preaches very different things, but how it materializes into a different world, like it's just. And I think I love when artists claim that identities. And like, I love, I think the work that you're doing, I find a lot of similarity in Africa and India. I think we also have very similar histories and also cultures. I think how rich we are um, in our own textiles, in our own craft. I love this about Africa and India is because, when I came from India, when I thought I didn't come from art and I came from design and fashion. And when I thought, I intended to become an artist like yourself, like you, um, I didn't feel like I was fitting in, even in India, because A, the Indian art ecosystem was very traditional, but B, also, it was so segmented in the sense that if I had to be an artist, I only had to paint. Like, I had to be a painter in order to become an artist. But I grew up in a rural India where, like, I've grown up with textiles and I've responded to materials and embroideries, and like, I love that. That's who I am. And for a very long time I didn't feel like I was fitting in, and I abandoned my identity at that point, because I thought, okay, that's, I want to be an artist, and artist, what I love is craft. So there was this segmentation that I figured that was between art and craft. And eventually, when I started to become vulnerable enough and also claim my identity enough that I no longer care about if it's art or craft or this, I started to bring my art all together. So now my art is completely different. It's so much texture, it's so much textile, it's so much embroideries. And I think I love that about African artists. I think, I love Visa's work, how she embraces fabric and textiles, and so many other like African work in our community. We work with so many African artists, and I feel like the moment I spot one, I know this person is either from Africa, India, because you can instantly see the reflection of texture. You can instantly see, how our cultures are so vibrant. And I think it's also bold and confident on the way we use materials.
Oh, wow. I think that's really profound too, the way you're talking about craft and textiles, because that's, I think, also something that we see here in the United States, where, so we had a show earlier this year in the spring called Threaded that was all quilts and textiles. And speaking of Visa Butler, we had two works by her centralized in the show, as well as works by Phyllis Stevens. Um, and then we had 8 quilts from the Gee's Bend, Alabama quilting community. And this is a community that has been pretty insular since the times of slavery. And these women, as a community, have made these quilts. And it was, I think, really powerful for some people to walk in the gallery and say, my grandmother made things like this. I never thought of this as artwork. I used to sleep under things like this, and be able to see themselves in it. So, in addition to, uplifting Black women artists in general, I think that it's very powerful what we can do to show the diversity of art making among Black women, and bring to the forefront things like quilting and textiles that are usually thought of as craft, and also as women's work, something that is inherently lesser than, because women are doing it. So I love that, and I love that you're thinking of it that way. And also, I almost can't believe that I'd never thought about this in that way before. But going back to what you were saying about yoga, which which I've been practicing in different ways for probably 12 years now. And even though I've heard, the Surya Namaskar, like as sun salutation, I never thought of itself as a prayer, which is wild because I think there's kind of a general, I want to say almost granola spirituality that's embedded into westernized yogic, practice. But there certainly isn't, in my experience, the explicit knowledge that what you are doing is prayer. This is, it's kind of, I think, branded as generally spiritual. And so I appreciate you saying that because it just hit me like, oh my goodness, that itself, I'd always thought of it as the thing that prepares you for meditation and prayer, but not as itself being the prayer to the sun, to the sky, to the day. So I thank you for that.
I am glad that we brought this up. But also, I think that's why what art does. Sometimes, there are days I'm sure a lot of us questions. This is a very common question. Sometimes comes up for artists, like, in a world, let's say, that's fighting, a world that's in war, a world that's struggling. What value do I have as an artist? Do I even matter? Does my work even matter? And I've thought this to myself so many times, when I lost my mom, when I saw COVID, when we see the world tearing apart and, everything happening. I feel like, um, and I think this also came to me, and I think I think from people like our ethnicities, when we travel or, um, or if you've moved, we understand loss of identity or what it means to be, let's say, a brown person or a black person, even though we've come far ahead of it. But there are reminders where you feel, oh, I didn't know this happened, or I didn't know this was still here. But also, it's also, I feel like it's like claiming identities. I think when I lost my mom, I almost felt that I'd lost who I was completely. No longer I could, and I think it was also after my father remarried. Like, it's everything great and all of that, but also it changes a lot of shifts. Like, I started asking myself the question, and I started to restore those ideas of how I grew up with, you know, how I see women in India. Like, and I think this is what the role of artists in today's time has become. And it's so important that in a world that we no longer know where the world is going, but, you know, lost culture, reviving that, holding on to it, and also holding on to it in a way that is true. Because so many times when we lose out those things, they have their own interpretations, and nobody knows what, like you said, what happened with yoga or what happens with yoga. And unless let's say, I'm someone who's part of the culture, or who comes, if I'm not aware enough or do I not embrace enough, I would never be able to share that with you or the world, truly. And I think artists have such an important, and the work that you're doing has such an important role in that. Because I can say, I would love, um, let's say, what's happening, or crafts of Nairobi, or the work in Kenya, or whatever. But I'm only an outsider or an onlooker who has a perception of what I know through a medium. Unless I visit an exhibition, or let's say any piece of art, that it's like a time capsule, which, encapsulates, and it's like, oh, what I thought or what I learned wasn't the whole truth. This is actually what this culture is about. And I think it's just so powerful.
Yeah, art is really incredible like that, right? It, like I said about the spirituals, I think it has such a power to capture a moment and also recuperate history. You know, when you were talking, you mentioning Bisa Butler, I think that there's a very popular way of describing Black artists in the United States right now where it's kind of seen as a corrective to art history. Like we've studied. Europe and the old masters, and now these are adding on to that history rather than thinking about perhaps artists like Bisa Butler are coming from a completely different perspective and lineage. You know, portraiture, she's not looking at the old masters. She's going to archival photography, which, by the way, thank you to Deborah Willis's work, but photography, the invention of photography coincided with emancipation in this country. And so photography became a way to finally envision ourselves as Black people, knowing that, of course, there were these see yourself and create images of your own eyes. Yes, because, of course, in order to justify slavery, there had to be these myths, these images of blackness created to dehumanize. Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, confuse and to dehumanize. And so Bisa is going to these old black and white photographs. So not things that are rooted in, European painting, not things that are rooted in European sculpture, things that are rooted in Black people taking the power of photography and wielding it for themselves. And I think that's different from the way a lot of times art today by people of color and Black people is characterized, because it's a different approach altogether for her.
Yeah, I love that. I think also that's an important conversation how people of color, people from different cultures and backgrounds, how they need to come on mainstream. I love how Bisa's work has come to into a huge spotlight, and it also continually brings uh, African stories back to people, reminds them, brings more spotlight on them. And I think that's why more people of color or women from different backgrounds need to come into more eyes, and more works need to be shown, because otherwise there will never be enough conversation, there will never be enough awareness. And I think shows like the ones that you make, I think they constantly, it's like bringing up the conversation back again and again and again until, people remember it, talk about it, or, it's just feeding into them.
That makes me think about, we just opened up an exhibition at the Spelman Museum last week. It's a solo show of an artist named Ming Smith, who is an incredible photographer. She's been working for 50 years, 5 decades, making images. And I was saying to someone, Sue Ross, actually, who's a well known photographer, she goes by Photo Griot here, photographer, storyteller, cultural worker. And I said, this is her first time having an exhibition in Atlanta and the first time at an HBCU, a historically Black college and university. And, she hasn't really gotten the attention that she deserves by museums. And she said, that's not surprising at all, because it's rare that women do, and especially Black women. It's just a good reminder that the mission of a place like the mission of Spelman Museum is so special, because it really is doing work that should be done by the entire arts ecosystem and has not been historically. So it's really an honor to bring artists like Ming. So she came out to the museum for the opening, and we had a moment where there's a group here called Sistography, like sisters photography. Really cool Black women photographers in Atlanta. And we literally gave her flowers, like stood around her and showed love and appreciation for her career and how much she's had an impact on people. And it's a really powerful thing, and something that might not be able to happen anywhere else. It could, but we are very proud to do that work.
I love that. Tell me something. There's also this, I think having museum shows is every artist's dream. I think I think there's something very powerful about museums, specifically, I think in the US, is you get access. Your work is no longer just for a few privileged. It reaches the masses. It reaches an audience that's, it's a very big validation for a lot of artists in the sense of, it's specifically for people who feel like, who have something to say, who um, who have a story to tell. Um, and also, this world is equally, I'm sure you would relate to it. It's like this mirage, like it's like this mysterious world a lot of artists just aspire to break into. Um, feel this is on, it's in at the top of the funnel, all of those things, but don't know how to get there. And also, a lot of times, what the real world actually is. Like, we only see, often people only see one end of what they can look at it as an outsider until truly you get that. Would you break that for us? Also, yourself going into museums as an artist, how you perceive versus what it works like, and just your wisdom on relationship of artists in museums, and how artists can find themselves the right path if they want to be there.
Well, I think the first thing is to, of course, make the art that you feel like you really want to make. Because when it comes down to it, I think that's the most important thing. Making art that is true to yourself. Because I think it's a double-edged sword, like the success of coming into the art world, not only in museums but the art market. You can get into relationships, for instance, with galleries or even just with collectors, where you are making things that you think will sell, things that you think will be profitable. And we all have to live. Totally understandable. But I think it's a slippery slope and it's dangerous. So my first piece of advice would be to be genuine to yourself in the materials you use and the type of art you make, and prioritize it, because a lot of times, artists are working, teaching, doing whatever you need to do to, yeah. And so I'd say investing in yourself as an artist as far as time and materials, and making sure that you're making things that make sense for you. As far as getting into museums, it's so I first started going to museums as a child. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I went to the Denver Art Museum growing up. And I think, like a lot of people, it feels like the art just kind of magically appears on the walls and there's no labor of the artist or the curators or the museum. It just kind of is. And it's incredible. We're in a very privileged position because across, at least in the United States, across race and class and so many factors, people generally trust museums and cultural institutions, like feel like they are worthwhile in society, which is a rare thing, especially when there is such an assault on anything that is communal in some ways, anything that's for the collective as a community. So, as far as developing relationships, I'd say getting to know the curators that you admire that are doing shows that you think are reflective of your values and the type of work that you want to do, and are creating narratives around work that you admire. Getting to know them, and that could be through social media, through reading, exhibition catalogs and books, and also putting yourself out there. which is a fine balance because you don't want to do too much, you want to be doing the most, but you also want to get yourself out there, which I think can also be a struggle for artists because not everyone wants to be on social media all the time.
Also, like, having jobs to do, having art to make, having people to reach out to, in between all of that, it does get a lot.
And I would say also just knowing that social media can be a very strong tool for you to show your work and to do research about museums and curators. And it is also a mirage. Not everything that you see is as it appears. So knowing that your favorite artist might look really happy and successful on social media, but they may be miserable.
Yeah, and that stays true for all, and not only artists. I feel like, yeah, that's the mirage. Like, that's the thing with social media.
Because people tend to only put the best of things or what they want you to see on there. So I would say, yeah, getting to know curators and museums that you love through their books, through social media, and also visiting museums and galleries as much as you can and getting to know and making sure you have a community of artists around you. So I mean, it's a lot. It really is a lot. There's not a straightforward path. And I think it happens very differently for people. And it also isn't linear, especially with women's lives. You know, it doesn't, if you get married and have a child or whatever, life doesn't stop. Life continues to go on, but you might have fits and starts, lulls that male counterparts may not. So, I mean, I think honestly, it makes me think about what we were saying about yoga. And this is for artists, but for people in general, making sure that you have a strong sense of self and that you're staying true to who you are, because the things that are measurements of success, many very deserving artists have not seen in their lifetimes. They might be included in shows and museums well after they're gone, unfortunately. And just knowing that um, it is not a straightforward.
Let's say if you as a curator, when you're curating a show, specifically a museum show, what are the things that you put yourself, like, what are the things, parameters in your own mind? Like, can you break that down for other people? Like, when you're thinking, how do you pick your artists? Is it only artists who are, shown around more? Like, what is your own take when you're curating these shows, and how are you, picking and choosing your artist?
Well, the work has to be pretty incredible. I do think that it is, and here's the thing is, I think that is in some ways very subjective. But I would say having a masterful take on whatever your craft is. And that might be, so for example, we did a show, Lava Thomas Homecoming. Lava Thomas is a draftswoman. She draws in pencil on paper. And she did this incredible series of women from the Montgomery bus boycott. She took their mug shots. So these are images that were created by women who decided that enough was enough. It was not okay that there was an unfair, unjust, segregated approach to the public transit system in Montgomery, Alabama, and they were arrested and knew they were going to be. It was part of the whole strategy. And so they went down to, the police station wearing their Sunday best, wearing their pearls, wearing their jewelry, wearing their furs, and were photographed for mug shots, things that are meant to criminalize and document them. And these are photos that were grainy. Some of them were ripped and stained. And so Lava Thomas said, I'm going to take these historic images and uplift these stories by drawing them, making them life size. So standing in front of them, it's pencil on paper. It's just shading and lines, but somehow she creates these gorgeous images of these women that, and their gazes, they are looking right at you. They're looking straight into your eyes. And so I say all of that because Lava Thomas herself as an artist is out of this world incredible. She has a God given gift that she is sharing with the world. And she's not just using it for anything, she's using it to say, when we hear about the Montgomery bus boycott and the civil rights movement, oftentimes it's Martin Luther King. We go back to the I Have a Dream speech, and it's boiled down to these sound bites and singular male leaders. But when it comes down to it, the Montgomery bus boycott was originated and organized by women. And that's an untold history. So there are numerous levels there. And remembering that we're also at Spelman College. So we're thinking about how students of the next generation have access to art and also have access to histories in the past. So for Lava, she's an out of this world artist. She's doing what she's doing in a way, and you walking through the gallery, having art professors and students come in blown away by the beauty of these images and also the enriching history. I'd say the same thing with Armonio Rosales. Her paintings are out of this world. They just vibrate the energy of these stories and also bring up these histories that are so incredible. So for me and for the museum, it's about being at the absolute top of your craft. I do think that that is something that is really important for museums to be showing work that is the best. And again, that is subjective, but every show that we've done, Ming Smith, Lava Thomas, Jamonil Rosales, and then the artists in Threaded, and also Black American Portraits, which I co-curated at LACMA and then brought to Spelman. Every single piece I would stand by and say, this artist themselves, they are so good. They are great at their craft in this work, and it's um, it's speaking to something larger for the culture and for history. So it's not just beautiful art; it's also art that I think should be shown and saved for generations.
Thank you so much, Liz. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your passion, your culture, your ideas, and about yourself. I am very, very grateful for having this chat with you, and I only look forward to more of working together, knowing and supporting each other. Um, where can people find you, support you, and if there's anything that you're working on that you want to share with us?
Absolutely. So, if you are in Atlanta or want to travel here, the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art is free and open to the public and is the only museum in the nation dedicated to art by and about women of the African diaspora. It's truly a gem. And the book, Black American Portraits from LACMA, I co-edited and wrote with Christine Y. Kim. Very proud of that book because it's something people can take away and learn from these beautiful images. And, I'm on Instagram and post from time to time about work and about balancing life and family and all the things that we do as women. And on Instagram, I'm Ms. Liz the Biz Wiz, which is a name that was given to me by my father as a child.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much for sharing and everybody who joined us. I'll make sure that we have all the details added on our website and in the show notes of this episode. Until then, I'll see you all again. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.